Hello ladies and gentlemen of the World Wide Web, my name is Edda320 and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel involving firearms. Yes, I know, I'm supposed to be a tank channel, here I am covering guns yet again. For those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, this is part 3 of my full series covering every single firearm in my collection. So I'm not going to let this intro take up any too much more of your time. I think we should just go ahead and get into the content. But before we do, just want to say, as always, if you enjoy the content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Join my Patreon where you get access to extended cuts of all these videos, behind the scenes, and even extra videos, stuff that I make on the side that I don't think is quite good enough for the main channel. Of course, no obligations. You get to watch the video and decide for yourself if you'd like to pursue any of that stuff, but it helps me out a lot. I always like to get that stuff out of the way at the beginning of the video because I always know I'm gonna forget it. But one thing I will not forget is the history of these fantastic weapons. So let's get into it. So we are going to be keeping up the exact format that I sort of started in the last video with the Lee Enfields, in the sense that we're gonna be covering basically 2 guns per video if I can, when I can. For those who don't know, my personal collecting goals are to collect service rifles of the First World War. However, like I said in the previous episode, I seem to somehow keep getting my hands on the World War II guns as well. The particular rifles that we have in front of us today are the Springfield model of 1903, technically the Springfield model of 1903, 05, 06 if you're seeing Arsenal, and then, of course, the infamous, iconic, beloved M1 Garand, or the M1 Garand. Personally, I try my best to say Garand because there was John Cantrus Garand, the guy who invented this rifle. He actually said his name was pronounced Garand. In fact, you might hear me slip up and say Garand as well in this video because I'm just weird. So today we're going to be going through the history, usage, and features of both of these rifles. I'm going to try to get through it in a timely manner. So we'll see if I can. And we're gonna start, of course, with the Springfield model of 1903. So, as with most things in history, in the military history space, our story does not actually begin with this rifle. I mean, to be honest, our story can actually go as far back as you want, depending. For today, the rifle we're specifically going to talk about before this one is the Krag Jorgensen model of, well, 1886, 1888, 1890s. There's a whole bunch of different models of the Krag Jorgensen. Krag Jorgensen is one of the few US service rifles that actually was not a US homebrewed design. It was actually a Norwegian design that the United States purchased. We liked it and adopted it and chambered it for a 3040 Krag cartridge, which I will leave a note somewhere on here. I believe 3040 Krag is a cartridge that was developed by the US. I don't think 3040 Krag was the original Norwegian chambering for the Krag Jorgensen. I think we made that caliber up. One of the most notable conflicts that the Krag Jorgensen was used in, and in fact leads directly into the development of this rifle here in particular, was the Spanish-American War in 1898, I believe it was. Now, the Spanish-American War is a whole topic in of itself that I'm not going to go through too deep in this video, but what it is important for us today is the United States basically getting a splash of water in the face that the Krag Jorgensen really isn't quite up to snuff. Real quick cameo. By 1898, the Gewehr model of 1898 has literally just come out, although the United States did not go up against the Gewehr 1898 during the Spanish-American War. Instead, they're going to go up against the 1893 Mauser rifle. The United States basically saw the 1893 Mauser and said, we want that. There's a lot of debate about whether the Springfield 1903 is just a copy of the Mauser. In a lot of ways it is. That was the point. They wanted a Mauser. Development begins pretty much right away after the Spanish-American War ends in December of 1898. By 1900, they have kind of the first working prototypes of Springfield model 1900s. They are essentially a Krag Jorgensen that has been heavily modified, heavily Mauser-fied, actually, I should say. The trigger group is actually pretty much the same as the Krag Jorgensens, but with a Mosin-style extended magazine where the magazine kind of sticks out the bottom of the rifle a little bit. If I can, quick cameo here from a model of 1891, original 1891 Mosin. The magazine system was actually very, very similar to this, where it was a single stack magazine that protruded out quite a bit from the bottom of the rifle, and it had the exact same spring mechanism. It had additional locking lugs, some Mauser style features, big boy thick extractor, and also really cool in my opinion was a Lee Enfield style magazine cutoff, similar to what ends up on the, another cameo, SMLE. Again, if you'd like the whole video on this rifle, check out part 2, where you had that tab of metal as that magazine cutoff. The original model of 1900 Springfield rifle had one of those as well. So it really is an amalgamation of all of the sort of best features that Springfield and the US Ordnance thought were the best features of the time. Of course, this rifle will continue to go through iterations with the Springfield model 1901, model 1902, until eventually we get to the Springfield model 1903. This rifle exactly is not quite what was adopted in 1903. The original rifles in 1903 had a completely different bayonet system, what was called at the time a rod bayonet, where essentially you had, what if you had a cleaning rod that you slipped out, flipped it around, plugged it back in, now it's a spiky point, and it also extends, you know, way far out beyond. So it's a cleaning rod slash bayonet. Othais from Sion Arsenal actually has a pretty nice explanation as to why this is actually not the worst idea at all at the time. The US Army is frontier focused, colonial focused in Latin American territories, the Southern American frontier. That is really where the US Army sees future conflicts going and sees current conflicts happening in the early 1900s. Bayonets are just kind of not really a thing that we foresee being a massive part of warfare in the future. Now, of course, skip ahead to the 21st century, and they were totally right on that, Fallujah notwithstanding. But obviously at the time, it does seem a little too ahead of the game, knowing what we know now, what goes on in the First World War. But in 1900, it's actually not a terrible method of thinking. Like, I think I do agree with Othais on that. The Springfield will continue to evolve. It'll get a new cartridge. So instead of being chambered for 3040 Krag, it is chambered for a 1903 style cartridge, which is really trying to match the ballistics of 8mm Mauser. They change up the stock, they change up the sight, they change up the barrel bands, they change up the magazine. Just really, really small incremental improvements to the point where it really no longer is just a Krag-Jorgensen Mauser-fied. 1905, we see the change over from the rod bayonet to a traditional style of bayonet. And this is really coming straight from, actually, the president himself. The president of the United States at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, writes a letter to the chief of ordnance. Basically, he came down and tried out the new Springfield 1903 rifle, and he writes a letter basically just absolutely shitting all over the rod bayonet. It is a strongly worded letter about just really how much he hates it. So they go back to the drawing board, they get rid of the rod bayonet. At first they consider a bolo style bayonet, and then they finally get to the model of bayonets that we kind of have today. If I can get this one out of its scabbard. There we go. The 1905 pattern of bayonet. You might notice that this one has the ring all broken and busted up. That is because, unfortunately, it just broke when I was shooting. I have a slow motion video of it right here. Now, I suspect this was a kind of a remanufactured bayonet anyways. Like, I don't think it's a full reproduction, but it is. I don't think it's completely original. The handle might have been original, but I think the blade might have been new. But it is unfortunate that I, fucking did that. That really kind of sucks. I have a scabbard for it here. I don't believe this is an original, like what the World War I scabbards would have looked like. I think this is more like a World War II US Marine type scabbard. Let's finish up our story on the development of the 1903. So 1905, they replace the bayonet style, and then in 1906, one other change is made where they update the cartridge, and they take that 30-03 30 caliber 1903 cartridge, and they swap out to the old sort of round nose style bullet for a Spitzer bullet. I think they also end up getting a lot more feet per second out of the cartridge, like it actually has better ballistic performance too. And this new cartridge is adopted, of course, in 1906 as the 30 caliber 06 30-06. So in 1906, they update to the now famous 30-06 caliber, and that is the official like solidification. That is the rifle there. So really, these rifles should be the 1903, 05, 06. And normally I would totally agree with that, except for the conversion process, the backwards conversion process for these rifles was so incredibly thorough that a vast majority of the 1903s were converted to the 05 and then 06 pattern. So there are very, very few original 1903 rod bayonet rifles in existence today. So I'm personally kind of okay with still referring to all of these as 1903s. But first, let's actually talk about this thing's use in World War I. So obviously, by the time 1913 rolls around, this rifle is basically what the United States Army is equipped with. We have both Rock Island Arsenal and Springfield Armory, when Springfield, of course, being the namesake of this rifle, is where this rifle was developed, tooled up and producing these rifles. Springfield Armory, of course, has a storied history that goes a very, very long way back in American arms production. Rock Island Arsenal, however, had only just recently tooled up for firearms production in 1904, I think it was, and not long after is when they would first start building these rifles. However, in 1913, in a bit of rather unfortunate timing, in order to save a little bit of money, because the United States was looking around saying, hey, well, we're probably not going to get dragged into a major conflict anytime soon, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, we're going to go ahead and shut down arms production at Rock Island Arsenal. Of course, this ends up being a terrible idea because only 1 year later, in 1914, a significant geopolitical event would take place. That is, of course, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip and the igniting of the powder keg that was European politics of the time, dragging the world into the First World War. Now, of course, for the majority of World War I, the United States is, well, not involved. Domestic private arms industry in World War I is cranking out weapons for pretty much all sides of the conflict, and the US is making a shit ton of money, hand over fist, doing that. But then, of course, in 1917, the United States is eventually dragged into the First World War. Rest in peace, my girl, the Lusitania. These rifles actually earned quite a good reputation during the First World War. They were rugged, they were reliable. I mean, it is, like we said, basically a copy of a Mauser rifle. So if a Mauser is gonna do good in the trenches, then there's no reason why a derivative of a Mauser won't do good in the trenches as well. These rifles were beloved for their accuracy, for their reliability, just generally being short, handy rifles. They were good rifles. They were perfectly good rifles. So this is actually, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating and really cool little pieces of American World War I small arms history. Although the 1903 was indeed the main service rifle on paper for the United States during World War I, in actuality, it wasn't. Boots on the ground, in common use, the 1903 was actually beaten out by another rifle, and that would be the US rifle caliber 30 M1917. Now again, if you haven't seen my Lee Enfield video, I highly recommend you actually go and check it out. In the British's attempts to replace the small magazine Lee Enfield with a Mauser Enfield hybrid rifle, they came up with the pattern 13 rifle. But of course, with the outbreak of World War I, the British found that they could not complete the switch over to the pattern 13, and they had to stick with the good old SMLE. Well, while production of the SMLE was spooled up in Britain, they outsourced production of the pattern 13, now pattern 14 rifle over to the United States. When 1917 rolls around and it's time for the US to enter the war, they take a look at everything they've got and they realize that they have a severe deficiency of small arms and particularly rifles. Rock Island Arsenal is told to spool production back up again during the war, but they just aren't quite able to get to the numbers that the US needs to equip the army. So what to do? Well, of course, they turn to the private industry. So they go to Winchester and they see production lines for the British pattern 14 rifle. And the US go to the British and they say, hey, can we take this rifle and rechamber it for 30-06, and can we put it into service for ourselves? And the British say, yep, sure thing. And it ends up being kind of emergency quasi-adopted as the model of 1917. And because of, again, Winchester having been producing these rifles for a few years at this point, the production lines have been set up, the model of 1917 is actually going to outnumber the model of 1903 by a ratio of about 3-to-1. So it's crazy. Again, for me, like, it's a really fascinating thing because we all think of the 1903 as like the poster child American rifle of World War I, but in terms of actual boots on the ground usage, like it wasn't. It was the 1917, a British designed rifle. Also, interestingly, a British designed like Mauser copy. It's a really, really interesting story. And I really wish I had a 1917 or a pattern 14 in my collection. Otherwise, those would be the two rifles we'd be talking about here today, and I would leave the Garand for something else. Excuse me, the Garand. But these are the two U.S. service rifles I have, so these are the ones that we're talking about. But the 1903 never stops being, again, that poster child, like on all the propaganda posters and everything like that. This 1903 is still touted as like the American mainstay rifle of World War I, even though, again, by the numbers, it wasn't. And then interestingly, after the First World War, the United States will kind of take a look around at their current stocks and, of course, make a decision as to what rifle they want to really properly standardize on going forward. The 1903 or the 1917. And interestingly, although, I mean, maybe obviously it does make sense, but the United States decides to stick with the 1903, and they do not full adopt the 1917, even though by many people's standards, it was the better rifle. I think even the US admitted, like, yes, it's the better rifle, but we're gonna keep the 1903 because it's our design, it's the home design, it's the rifle our boys really love. Also, I think like Springfield and Rock Island, like all of the facilities that we have up have been producing this rifle, they know how to make this one. However, they kind of note at that time, none of this really matters all that much because we know for sure we're gonna go for a self-loader next. So here we are with our Springfield model of 1903. This is a pretty box standard bolt action rifle with a Mauser style action. For those of you who are really not aware of what a Mauser style action, like what does that mean when people say that? It's really to do with the features, particularly of the bolt. The two very large front locking lugs, unlike the Lee Enfield, which we saw last video, which had the locking lugs at the rear. These two are up front. With this particular rifle has a third locking lug here on the back body of the bolt. And traditionally they'll have a 3-position flag safety, which I'll show you how this works once I put this back in the rifle. Real quick though, let's compare this with the other Mauser style rifle that of course this rifle is gonna get compared to an awful lot. The Gewehr model of 1898, which is of course also a Mauser style action, and many would argue actually it's the pinnacle of a Mauser style action. Obviously, yes, these two bolts have a lot in common. The locking lugs are very, very similar, although the 1903 seems to have a bigger locking lug up here at the top. The extractor is pretty much the same, although the Gewehr 98 actually has an even bigger extractor. It's also got this rib here on the top. The 1903 is missing. And again, that third locking lug, which on the Gewehr 98, it's here on sort of the side of the bolt, whereas on the 1903, it's kind of up here on the top, and it's much, much bigger because it also acts as sort of a guide for the bolt as it travels through the receiver. Also quite obvious is the fact that the 1903 has a bent down bolt handle, where the Gewehr 98 has a straight bolt handle. And then again, the 3-position flag safety, which is quite similar on the two bolts, but is in fact a little bit different. With the way the safety works is when you rotate the flag, locks the cocking piece to the rear. When you rotate that flag, it's 2 lugs that lock up on the locking piece and hold it in place, whereas on the Gewehr 98, it is only 1. And then also, obviously, the cocking piece itself is much, much larger here on the 1903 versus the Gewehr 98 bolt, where it is much, much shorter. Overall, it seems the 1903 is a much, much longer profile bolt than the Gewehr 98. However, this comparison really isn't quite fair because 1903 was not based on this Mauser action, it was based on its predecessor, the 1893 Mauser action. So if I had an 1893 Mauser here today, I would definitely be comparing those two, but the closest I have is an 1898, but you can see that even still, they are very, very similar. It's quite interesting, it's sort of this idea of you take the 1893 Mauser, and then this is what Paul Mauser himself did with the 1893 Mauser to improve it, and then this is what the Americans did with the 1893 Mauser to improve it. So it's quite fascinating in that regard, in my humble opinion. But let's go ahead and put these bolts back in. So people will often talk about the legal trouble that the 1903 got into as a result of copying the German Gewehr 98. And the story that especially Fuds like to tell people at the gun range is, well, during World War I, since we copied the German rifle, we had to pay reprimands to the Germans for the stolen design while we were shooting at them with the copied rifle. Ain't that something? It's the whole thing is all like, how ironic is that? But it's not true. Firstly, the first thing that the United States was dogged on by the Germans for copying was actually the strip clip design. for the 1903, because this is straight up just a one-to-one copy of Paul Mauser's original design for strip clip. Remember, Paul Mauser invented the strip clip. Prior to Paul Mauser, it was M-block clips, like you'd see on the Carcanos, or specifically the Mannlicher. Mannlicher invented those clips. And then Paul Mauser invented these clips. And in fact, it was actually the US who realized this, and the US Patent Office, the US government, went to Germany and said, hey, Germany, we noticed that we're probably infringing on your patent for the stripper clip. Or, they went to Mauser specifically. Can we work this out? And this was, like 1903, 1904, 1905. Like this was like the early 1900s. I actually don't know the exact year, but it was way before World War I. So Mauser said, yes, you are indeed infringing on our stripper clip design. And we've noticed that you have a rifle that is also infringing on some of our patents. And so we would like reprimands for that. And it was all negotiated by the lawyers, and everyone came to an appreciable agreement, and the sum was paid. So when it came to the reprimands paid to Germany for copying their rifle, that was done and dusted before World War I even began. Now, the one that did happen during the war was later on. WDM, the parent company over Mauser, which is an ammunition manufacturer, they went after the US for stealing the Spitzer bullet, the pointed tip. Because for most intents and purposes, the Germans are the ones who invented the Spitzer bullet. Well, actually, that's not true. The French had experimented with it before that, but nobody cared back then. But then when the Germans did it, now all of a sudden everyone cared. We want reprimands for that too. And that's not Mauser. Mauser got what they wanted, but the company that owned Mauser now wanted a bit of quiche as well. So they went after the US for the Spitzer bullet. But that was argued and defended in court because the US had research information going all the way back to 1894 on our own personal, separate, independent development of Spitzer bullets. So the argument in court was we couldn't have copied the Spitzer bullet from you because we were also hot on the trail of this technology. So we came to it our own way. We're not stealing your patent for it. That ends up being a legal battle. Parent company DWM over Mauser is going to sue the US for damages. And while that lawsuit is going, the First World War kicks off, and all of those proceedings are put on hold. There are no reprimands or payments being made to the Germans by the US during World War I. It is then returned to after World War I. The United States then gets itself into some hot water because during the war, while everything was on hold, the US Patent Office is going to illegally seize the patent from the Germans for the Spitzer bullet. And apparently, illegally seizing a weapons patent from a nation during wartime, especially if you are at war with them, that is a war crime. So after World War I, the United States gets caught for doing that, and then after the war, we have to pay reprimands to DWM, not because we stole the Spitzer bullet, but because during the war, we seized the patent for the Spitzer bullet, when, by the way, we totally didn't need to. It's so funny to me how America got caught with the most white-collared war crime of all time. It's a war crime. That's legit. You can't do that. But it's such a silly pencil pusher, you can't seize a patent during wartime. It's not the story that everyone thinks, but in my opinion, the actual story is even funnier. So we had to pay up, I think $400,000 to DWM in 1919 money or whatever, 1920 money, all over a fucking stupid tipped bullet. So it wasn't even for the Mauser rifle being copied. It was for the bullet. So as I mentioned, this is a standard bolt action Mauser style action. This is a cock on open style action. The 3-position flag safety on the back operates as such. Firstly, it does not operate at all if the rifle is not cocked. So if you cock the rifle, I'll put it back down. It's even labeled, which I think is so cool and so neat that the US actually bothered to do this. It says ready on there, basically meaning it is ready to fire. It is off safe. You can flick it up to the middle position. The trigger is dead, but you can still actuate the action. You can still open the rifle and do whatever you need to do and close it up. And then flipping it all the way the other way, where now it says safe, the trigger is still dead, and the action is locked. I absolutely adore the 3-position flag safety, and the 1903, this was my first ever Mauser style rifle. I can't express how much I really enjoy this feature. As a civilian shooter who just goes to the target range and plinks every now and then, having the ability to know that the trigger is dead and I cannot accidentally set off the rifle, but I can still open it up and troubleshoot a dud round or anything that might be happening, a failure to feed, whatever it might be, or even just, put a strip clip in and load it. You can do any of what you need. For me, this is an incredibly awesome feature. I really, really appreciate it, especially when you put it in conjunction with the magazine cutoff. So I'll flip this around and we'll look at the magazine cutoff that I think is also really cool and really ingenious. So this is quite literally, you can see it says on there, off. Again, so cool that they bothered to label the switch there. So off meaning the magazine feed is off, so it will not feed from the magazine. So if we just flick this on, I wish I had dummy rounds, sorry guys, but actually I have, hold on. I have some empty casings that I think would be nice that we can use for this. Empty casings I have, completely safe. But let's demonstrate this. So we have our magazine feed is on. You open the rifle all the way. Obviously it's going to feed from the magazine. And these being spent casings, it's a little bit stiff, but there you go. So it'll feed. If I then, let's say, pull the trigger, the round goes off, I'm gonna open it, pull it open, eject the spent casing. Magazine feed is still on, so when I come forward again, it's gonna pick up the next round and feed it into the rifle. All well and good. Well, if we take our magazine cutoff and then flip it off, I will open the action, eject our spent casing, and then if I try to pick up the next one, you see, it won't. Now, because these are spent casings, I could push this way further forward and then it's still gonna pick it up. But when it's a full round with a full bullet in it, it's gonna be seated way here at the back of the magazine. What the magazine cutoff is doing is it is blocking the bolt stop and preventing the bolt from opening all the way. So you'll see it's actually stopping short of opening all the way. Because of that, the bolt is just barely still sitting over the top of the next round in the magazine, and so it won't pick it up. So I can actuate the action all I want, and I will not feed from the magazine at all. This is super useful in conjunction with the 3-position flag safety, where I can set it to that, again, like middle position flag safety. If I open the rifle to, again, troubleshoot, like a stuck round or a failure to feed or a failure to eject or whatever it might be, I can open the rifle and I can get at whatever's happening, and I know that not only is the trigger dead and the rifle can't go off, but also I can't accidentally feed another round through my troubleshooting. There's so many times where something's gone wrong, and so I want to open up the rifle and I want to take a look at what I've done, but I open it up, I try to troubleshoot some things, and then when I try to close it again, it picks up the next round from the magazine and it tries to do a double feed, and it's just a nightmare. But being able to put that 3-position flag safety and the magazine cutoff, it's just an incredible combination of features for the civilian shooter. Now, moving forward on the rifle to something that I don't like about it very much are these sights. These are commonly referred to as the battle computer sights because they truly are incredibly complicated and also just not very good. I'll go into that here. So on its own, you have a very like small and thin and difficult to pick up on a square rear notch. I just hate it. It's just not nearly tall enough. The notch isn't deep enough. It's just terrible. I really don't like it. And then the sight itself is so complicated. First of all, you have a dial here for windage. So this one is very stuck on me. I really struggle to get it. I think I need to get a pair of pliers and clamp down on it and turn it. But you turn this dial here, it'll pivot here at the back and it'll turn left or right for windage. And then you have your elevation here, which is really only useful when you flip this up. So you flip it up and you get access to the settings on your battle computer. You twist this and that unlocks the sight, and then you can raise and lower it. And look how much sight goes with it. There's so much here. Twist it again to lock it in place. You've got a rear peep sight, so a little circular peep aperture. Above it, you have another like notch sight on this square above the peep. Then you've got another notch on the actual adjustment bar, and then another notch up here at the very tippy top, just in case you, for whatever reason, just want to go full nuts to butts, like volley shooting this thing. And so each of these things can be adjusted. You twist this knob and you pull it up or down, and you're adjusting at the same time like 3 different peeps or sights or notches that you can use. It is unnecessarily complicated, and I personally just don't like it because it just doesn't give you a great sight picture. Now, actually, it kind of does in the sense that because it is such a small and shallow sight, it does mean that there's not a lot blocking your view and the sights are very clear. You can see over top of the rifle very well, and you get a good additional awareness around the sight and the rifle, and what you're looking at is very good. But again, just the sight is just so, I can't stress to you how shallow this is and how small that aperture is, or that notch. It is so difficult to pick up. I really, really don't like these sights. So I think the last thing we can talk about here with the 1903 are the accessories and markings on this rifle, because the markings especially and the story provenance of this particular rifle, in my opinion, are really, really cool. The sling is a standard US, I forget, actually I think this is a 1907 pattern sling, I totally forget. But what's really cool about this one, this is a reproduction, by the way, in case you're wondering. This was the standard sling used by the US during World War I and for most of World War II. I think the canvas style sling didn't come into play until like December of '44, something like that. But what's really cool is if I flip this around, Rock Island Arsenal 1918. Obviously, again, this is a reproduction, so these are fake markings, but still cool that the people who reproduced this sling put that detail on there. And it's really cool that it says Rock Island Arsenal on it, because that is also what it says here on my rifle. So hopefully you have a really nice view of that. I'm gonna heat this up and get all this wax melted out of here, and I'm gonna put my own white crayon wax in here. Because I do think it looks really, really cool when these little details are highlighted, but hopefully it doesn't quite affect your ability to read this. The markings on this rifle read US Rock Island Arsenal Model 1903 with a serial number of 393510. Now, hope you guys are comfortable because I'm going to talk about this for a good while here. First of all, this is a Rock Island Arsenal 1903, which for me, in my opinion, is really, really cool because between Springfield and Rock Island, obviously these are less common. Doesn't mean it's like rare, but again, it means it's less common, which to me is really cool. Also, despite Rock Island Arsenal being involved in production of rifles during World War I, once the war ends in 1918, Rock Island Arsenal is told, just halt, stop production of all rifles, right wherever it is now, just stop. So they do exactly that. In 1918, Rock Island Arsenal stops producing rifles, and they never really get back involved in the small arms production game. Obviously, the Garand and all these other future firearms projects all go to Springfield. But what's cool, Rock Island Arsenal is obviously a huge name in American interwar tank development. All the stuff for, I mean, everything. All like the M1s, the M2s, the M3s, or well, the T1s, T2s, T3s, the Cunninghams, the light tanks, the medium tanks, all of it. It's all Rock Island. So for me, it's really, really cool to have that connection point, to have this name that I am so familiar with on the tank side of things. To have a rifle with their name stamped on it is so, so cool. As a tank nerd, I really like that. Another really important thing is, of course, the serial number. If you go on the internet right now and look up Rock Island Arsenal 1903 date range, it says that in 1918 they stopped production right around, I believe it's like 290 something thousand or something like that, or the early 300s maybe. I'll put the number here on screen so know for sure. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's a lot lower than this. So if you just read that and go, wait a minute, if they stop production, you know, at like 290 or something, then how the hell do I have a rifle that's 393,000? How is that possible? And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. So again, in 1918, Rock Island Arsenal was told, stop producing rifles. Well, when you just halt production like that, yeah, you're no longer churning out completed rifles, but there are still receivers and bolts and barrels and all these things coming down your assembly line. Well, when you just halt production, all of those components are still just kind of sitting around in the factory. The US was, you know, knowledgeable of this, and for the time being, they just put them all away in storage. Then, between 1920 and 1927, Springfield Armory is going to be tasked with taking all of those old bolts and receivers and barrels and stocks and all these old parts out of the Rock Island storage and assemble them as completed rifles at Springfield. Springfield Armory will just continue the serial number range where Rock Island left off. When you take all of those rifles into account, the total serial numbers of Rock Island Arsenal produced 1903s actually goes all the way up to like 420,000 or something like that, like up into the 400s. So me having a 393 totally works out. And before any of you ask, yes, that obviously means the serial number range is well within spec to be a properly heat-treated receiver. For those who don't know, there was a scare in World War I of receivers not being properly heat-treated for the 1903. Basically, the forges did not have proper temperature measuring equipment for when they were heating up the metal and heat treating the metal. So the guys at the forge would just eyeball it, just based on the color that the metal glowed. They were like, yeah, that's enough heat. The temperature's correct for the heat treat. But of course, depending on the conditions of like what time of day it was, whether it was cloudy, whether it was foggy, whether it was early in the morning or later in the day, the glow of the metal could be slightly different. It could be off by as much as 300 degrees, which is very important. General Hatcher will be in charge of investigating this. As far as we know, not very many, if any, receivers actually exploded on soldiers in the war. There are some reports that maybe some soldiers had thrown 8mm Mauser, which is obviously the incorrect ammo, into one of these guns and it like blew up on them or something. There's obviously reports of poorly manufactured 30-06 causing these receivers to fracture or crack or anything like that. But General Hatcher went to investigate Rock Island Arsenal and Springfield Armory and all these guys on these heat-treated receivers, and he was able to take them out of the lines and crack them with a hammer, which is obviously not nearly strong enough. So Rock Island Arsenal actually halted production of 1903s over this issue and then pick it back up again once they had resolved it. Springfield kind of has like a meshing area in the 800,000 serial number range where they were fixing it. So if you have a 1903 from Springfield with a serial number before 800,000, it is probably a poorly heat-treated receiver and you should be quite weary of it. A lot of people say it's actually not really an issue anymore, that they often say like, oh, if it was going to explode, it would have done it a long time ago. I'm not personally convinced by that. Like, I think if a receiver is dangerous, there's still reason that it might explode today. Like, just because it hasn't exploded already doesn't mean it won't, still with like a poor reload or something. So be careful with those. If you want to take the risk and own one, like, go for it. I'm very lucky in that I got one obviously so late in production by Rock Island that clearly this is totally safe. If you have a Rock Island Arsenal model, I think it's like in the 264,000 serial number. Is the first like properly heat-treated receiver. So if you have one pre-264 by Rock Island, please be careful. It might be better just to have it as a wall hanger, but if you want to shoot it, please just make sure you know what your loads are. But this was all, resolved by the end of the war. Now, in fact, actually, when they resolved the issue, the receivers were coming out so strong they were able to withstand like 120,000 PSI or something like that, like way beyond what they would ever like realistically come across. These rifles will continue to see service obviously after the First World War into the 1920s and 30s and especially into World War II, and that's where kind of the rest of this rifle comes into play, I guess I should say. The stock on this rifle is obviously in amazing condition, and also it lacks the finger grooves that the original stocks in World War I had, and it's got a sort of lowered hump here in front of the rear sight. This particular stock is known as a Remington style stock. This is not a scant stock. Basically, after the war, two big changes were made to the 1903s. One, they took the rear sight and moved it backwards and turned it into a peep aperture sight. That became the 1903 A3. And then the scant stock, which is where they added a pistol grip, basically, a semi-pistol grip to the wrist of the stock here. Those, I believe, are the 1903 A1s. I think it's the A1s. And then the 1903 A2s were actually just like the barreled action stuck into an artillery piece and used for artillery training to save money in the interwar period, because as anybody who understands American World War II or American interwar history will know, super strapped for cash at the time, the military in particular. And then they were all converted into 22 caliber training rifles. And then the 03 A4 is the one with the sniper scope. But this is just a stock standard 1903. It's not an A1 or an A3, anything like that. But these stocks were made specifically by Remington during World War II because these rifles did see extensive use during the Second World War. Quite simply because, as we were hoping wouldn't be the case, we did not have enough M1 Garands. Remember how I had said after World War I, when deciding between the 1903 and the 1917, they said, honestly, we're gonna pick the 1903. It doesn't really matter because by the time the next conflict happens, we'll have switched to a self-loading rifle. That was mostly true in the sense that we had adopted one, but it was not in mass use at the time. Sorry, I've got cartridges up here. I didn't realize. My empty casings blocking the frame. When the United States originally joined in 1941, World War II, we joined with 1903s. We had a bunch of Garands, especially like the US Army was pretty decently equipped with Garands, but in 1941 going into everything, especially like even the Army was still mostly using 1903s. And then specifically the Marine Corps continued to use 1903s. I've read conflicting things. I've read some things that say that they had 1903s just because it was the hand-me-down, like the Army got first pick and the Army had the Garand, and then just because the 1903 was what was left, that's what the Marines got. I've also read some things that say that the Marines actually didn't trust the Garand at first, and the Marines like specifically selected to keep using the 1903. I'm honestly not sure which of those two things is true. It's honestly, like most things in life, probably a mixture of both. It probably depended on what unit you asked and what people you went to. Some people probably did genuinely prefer the 1903 and actively chose it, and then some units probably wanted Garands but couldn't get them. But the Marines in particular will really continue to use the 1903, although the Army will continue to use them specifically for grenade launching and sniping. Obviously with the A4 variant, this will become like the main sniper rifle, but rifle grenades were much better shot off of 1903s, especially for a couple different reasons, but mostly because of the magazine cutoff, allowing you to load your rifle with, 4 or 5 rounds in the magazine, and then enable the magazine cutoff, and then single load blank cartridges, so you could lob rifle grenades, and you know that you're not going to accidentally feed a real bullet and then shoot a real bullet into your rifle grenade. So I think within the Army, you actually had guys who carried both of these rifles. One guy, like, he carried a Garand as like his main actual fighting rifle, but since he was like the rifle grenadierman, he also carried a 1903 specifically to launch rifle grenades off of. I think it was something as well with the gas system of the Garand just made it not super optimal for launching rifle grenades. There's World War Wisdom has a great video about actually the 1903's continued use in World War II. So this rifle has a World War II style Remington stock on it. Also on the barrel, and I'll include a photo of this because you can't really see it with the camera, but on the barrel it is dated 8-44 with a U.S. Ordnance Fleming bomb and an S for Springfield, which is basically a rebarreled, a date for rebarreling the rifle, or I mean more overall, re-arsenaling and refurbishing this rifle. In combination with what we know about the markings on the receiver, the stock it currently has, and a bunch of other small features that actually myself and my uncle, we spent like hours doing research on this. So this particular Springfield model of 1903, I believe its specific history is as follows. The receiver is forged in 1918 at Rock Island Arsenal. Shortly after, Rock Island Arsenal is told to halt production of rifles. This receiver, along with many other components, put away in storage. Between 1920 and 1922, this receiver is dug back out and sent over to Springfield Armory, where Springfield pairs it with a new bolt, trigger, stock, barrel, sights, everything, and finishes it as a completed rifle. Presumably then, this rifle would serve in the 1920s and 30s as, during training exercises, and then presumably when World War II broke out, this rifle went into service. Whether it fought in the Pacific with the Marines or fought with the Army as a grenade launching rifle, it could be anything. But I personally do believe that this did fight in World War II because clearly it was refurbished. So I think this rifle actually fought in World War II and got so banged up, presumably, in combat, like maybe the stock broke or it was just, for whatever reason, in August of 1944, it was taken back to Springfield Armory and refurbished. And then of course, August 1944, the Garand is common use at this point, like nobody's using 1903s anymore. So presumably after being refurbished, this was put back into storage and then not touched since. So I like to tell people that this is a good example of both what we went to war with in World War I and also what the Marines probably would have had for a good chunk of World War II. In fact, as far as I know, there was 1 or 2 units of the Marines that never switched to the Garand. Like they always had 1903s from 41 to 45. Anyone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that, but of course, this was in fact not the mainstay service rifle of either World War I or World War II, even though I do believe it saw way more use in World War II than it did in World War I, like numerically. Still, it was outshined yet again by a completely different rifle. Let's get poor little 1903 out of the way while we talk about the ping. And in fact, I'd like to apologize. We have a video with an M1 Garand in it, Garand, whatever. And not once have I treated you all to a ping. There you go. So, of course, the second rifle we have to talk about today, God, I hope this video isn't already an hour long, is the infamous, the iconic, the one and only M1 Garand, or Garand, or whatever the hell you want to call it. I'm gonna probably keep calling it the Garand because I'm stupid, but just know that I do, like I said earlier in the video, I do predominantly agree that it should be the Garand, but whatever. So, the M1 Garand really has its origins kind of all the way conceptually it has its origins even pre-World War I. Self-loading rifles was obviously a technology that pretty much existed as soon as Carl Maxim invented the machine gun. As soon as Maxim discovered the concept of, hey, when you pull the trigger and it goes off, there's all this energy that's sent outward to make the bullet go down the barrel, but there's a bunch of energy that's also going to be coming backwards at you, recoil. What if there was a way to harness the energy coming backwards at you to cycle an action automatically? Now, Carl Maxim will go ahead and skip over pistols and rifles and everything else and shotguns and all that other stuff, and he'll go straight to the machine gun. And as soon as he does that, like at that point, the technology to create semi-automatic weapons, like, boom, has been unlocked, you know? The US sees the potential. And again, like I said, with the 1903, the whole idea was, after World War I, we don't really care what rifle we adopt because we know we're gonna put all our money into developing a semi-automatic rifle. And that's basically what happens in the 1920s and 30s. They go through a lot of different designs, and it just keeps coming down to this dang cartridge. It's just too big, it's just too beefy, it's just too powerful. But the US is not willing to get rid of it quite yet. They like the power for the range, the muzzle velocity, the marksmanship, the potential to one-shot down a guy. I've heard some people claim that even like in World War I and such, one of the reasons why these really big cartridges were so popular was because they wanted a bullet that could take out a horse, because obviously before World War I, like cavalry combat was still super, super common. And I brought that up with somebody who I respect very much with history knowledge, and they said that's bullshit. But I don't know, I think it makes sense. They start changing their tune, especially as more and more semi-automatic rifles chambered for .30-06 just keep coming and failing, and they just, nothing is working. Finally, at the time, a prolific gun designer named John, I think his first name was John Pedersen, who is the inventor of the Pedersen device, which again, a whole video on that, go to CN Arsenal, they have a great video on it. A very, 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 very talented and respected gun designer of the time. John Pedersen basically straight up says, like, look guys, like we just can't do this with these full power rifle cartridges. Like, you need to reduce the cartridge. It's just not gonna work otherwise. And John Pedersen just had enough clout, he had enough aura, that they actually listened to him finally when he said that. Everyone else would say it, they'd say, you're stupid, you're lame, keep trying. But when Pedersen says it, they say, you know what, maybe this guy like is onto something, maybe he's right. They give him free reign, they say, fine, you can make a new cartridge and you can develop a rifle for that cartridge, and let's see how it does. So Pedersen comes up with this new .276 Pedersen caliber. It's, again, not quite an intermediate cartridge, but it's definitely a lot smaller than a .30-06. Along next to him, designing a rifle for this caliber, are other people, but namely a French-Canadian immigrant engineer named John Cassius Garand. Garand had been working on, I think he was working on machine gun projects during the First World War, and then after World War II, or after World War I, in the 20s, he is reassigned to help solve this issue of the self-loading rifle. So Pedersen and Garand both really end up with they both end up being the guys who managed to actually create a successful self-loading semi-automatic rifle. Go head to head, and John Garand's design is actually superior. It's simpler, it's more reliable, it's more accurate. The Army, they like it better. So they pick John Garand's design, and they are on the verge of adopting it, and right before they do, a slap comes down on the whole thing. General MacArthur himself steps in and says, no, wait a minute. We can't change calibers. As much as this Pedersen caliber seems really awesome and really nice and everything, we have so much .30-06 left over from World War I. We have so much of this crap in inventory, and also the common belief that your rifle and your machine guns need to share caliber. Like, we just can't afford to introduce a new cartridge, especially here in the 20s and 30s when we are so starved for cash. This would be a logistical undertaking of insane magnitudes, and we just can't do it, and it's not a good idea. This is a great rifle, this is a great idea, the caliber, like, it makes so much sense when you're just looking at it on the rifle alone, but he says something along the lines of, like, this will have knock-on consequences that just nobody's thinking about right now, and like, this is bad, and we need to concern ourselves with the logistical side of this whole thing, which I am a huge fan of. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. So basically he sends everyone back to the drawing board, and I mean, really long story short, John Cassius Garand just goes back and he just rebuilds this rifle to take .30-06, and it works. As far as I know, it wasn't as good as the original .276 caliber version of the Garand, but I mean, this thing's a great rifle. Like, I don't need to tell you that. You guys all know. If you're watching this video, you know this thing is a fantastic rifle. So he made it work anyways. But it is interesting to think that there actually is a better version of this rifle out there that is chambered in a much nicer cartridge. And I am really tantalized by that idea. But that's basically it. And then in 1936, the US Army officially adopts John Canjus Garand's rifle. Now, of course, the early rifles had the gas trap design where basically a lot of nations that were really scared of self-loading rifles in the interwar period, scared of the technology, not understanding how it was going to work. Germany was along the same lines where they were, for some reason, terrified of the idea of drilling a hole in the barrel to tap the gas out of the barrel for your self-loading mechanism. John Canjus Garand's original design was the gas trap M1, where basically up by the muzzle, instead of drilling a hole in the barrel and then tapping the gas through a gas block here at the front, instead, the gas block wrapped around the end of the muzzle and tapped the gases that were coming out of the muzzle and then routed them back through the gas tube and driving the piston of the gun. This was the original design that was accepted in 1936. Pretty quickly, it is noticed that this is, in fact, a terrible idea and is not nearly as reliable. So pretty quickly on, they will change from the gas trap M1s to drilling a hole in the bottom of the barrel and just tapping the gas through what we consider today to be a traditional gas block. And obviously they make that change and it increases the reliability of the rifle tenfold, 20-fold, makes it much, much better. And then that is essentially the version that goes into the Second World War. I mean, it's one thing, like, I think Forgotten Weapons, like Ian McCullum said it best, where we had the M1 and we just stuck with it. There are basically no variations on the M1. Like the same M1 that you would have got in 1941 is the exact same one you would have got in 1945. It's the exact same one you would have gotten in 1956 or 1955, you know? This thing wasn't replaced until 1959 with the M14, you know? Yes, there are small changes. People point out like the sights and the trigger guard, and people can spot like, oh, that's a post-1943 charging handle. Like, yeah, I get it. And normally I would be on that level of autism, but for the Garand, I'm personally don't really care too much at the moment. It's one of those things where once I start learning those differences, I'm sure I'll get really into it. But right now, I don't know all the differences, so I'm just happy. Like, to me, Garand is Garand. I mean, obviously, you guys don't need me to tell you. This thing is an absolute workhorse of the Second World War for the US Army. General Patton quite famously referred to it as the greatest battle implement ever devised. Obviously, he is probably a little bit exaggerating there, but I honestly totally see where he's coming from, and I kind of agree with him, to be honest. I really do think it's, you know, I try my best to avoid American exceptionalism. Like, I know, especially for us Americans, we love to tout that our thing was the best thing. I am obviously not saying that other nations weren't capable of making really, really good rifles in the Second World War, but I do think I'm willing to put my neck on the line and say that I do think the M1 Garand is probably the best infantry rifle of the Second World War. Could there have been something better? Sure, totally. Like, detachable box magazines were a technology that totally existed in the 1930s. They could have done that, but they didn't. I think the 8-round en-bloc clip was a great compromise of, we're not doing a detachable box magazine, but we need something better than 5-round strip clips. I think this is a great compromise. Obviously, the original 276 Pedersen, actually, M1 Garands, had 10 rounds available in the clips, but obviously sizing up the cartridge reduces your capacity. The actual Garands ended up with 8-round clips, as we now know them today. And in fact, just for posterity's sake, let's go ahead and give ourselves another celebratory cling, or ping. Little treat for making it this far in the video. Thank you so much for watching. Delicious. It is a fairly hefty rifle, I will say. It's actually like decently heavy. A lot of solid metal blocks to it, but not heavy enough that like I think it would be unbearable. But I think enough of the kind of overview of the M1 Garand. Like, there's just history is so well covered on this rifle. I think it's, you know, not too much to go through. But let's go through the individual features of this rifle, my particular rifle, and go through the quick history. It will be quick because this rifle doesn't have much of a provenance because it is, well, I'll explain it here in a second. This will be a very, very short segment of the video. So when examining the particulars of my M1 Garand, honestly, there's not a super whole lot to look at, but we'll go through just the basic functions of the rifle. So unlike every other rifle I've shown on this series so far, this is a semi-automatic rifle. This does not require you to cycle the bolt every single time manually. It should go automatically when you just load rounds into it. Obviously, the way it works is you take a 8-round clip, you press it into the gun. Obviously, I'm not going to do that with live rounds here, but You push it in. Now, obviously with rounds, the rounds are gonna start depressing the follower right here. And I'm gonna keep my hand on the charging handle just in case I don't wanna get my grand thumb. But you push all the way down, and then as you push down, the follower starts to go down with it. And then as you push on the follower, you will trip the release, or the bolt hold, basically. And now the charging handle wants to come forward, so I will let my thumb out. And the charging handle just flies forward with incredible force. And of course, every time you fire the rifle will cycle. So then when you fire your last round, that is going to cause, obviously, the bolt to open up again, and the clip, whoa, I edged all of you. I edged all of you on the ping. Oh my goodness, how dare I? I didn't pull with enough gusto. See, this is where the intricacies of the Garand's operating mechanism start to become known. Sorry, when you fire the last round, the clip flies out the top. There is actually a hold open on the M1 Garand. It's actually up here in the stock where there's a bar. Actually, it's the bar that the op rod connects to. The op rod actually goes forward, and then right about here, it bends downwards and then continues straight along under here. And right about at where it bends down, and there's an angle down here, there's actually a bar connected to the follower that actually holds it in place. If you depress the follower far enough, eventually, right now, I have to, and I'm not adding any pressure, no pressure at all. The follower is all the way down, no pressure at all on the charging handle, right? And it's not slamming on my finger. Right now, there is no longer any tension on the bolt hold open. So if you just give the charging handle a slight pull back, you feel that click. I've definitely felt it, I don't know if you heard it. Now that arm inside the stock here, the bolt hold open arm has now officially disconnected. And now the charging handle wants to fly open on my thumb. But I saw a YouTube short where somebody pointed this out. It is possible, and I agree with them, I noticed this myself. It is possible to open the Garand not all the way. I have not pulled the bolt far enough back to engage the bolt hold open mechanism. It is only far enough back to where it is legit. It's just caught on the follower. This is Garand thumb territory, because if you depress that follower even just a little bit, the bolt is no longer being held by anything, and it's just gonna fucking eat your thumb, and that's gonna be a bad time. So you wanna make sure you get it all the way back, and now you can't see the bolt head or anything. It's not resting on the follower. Now at this point, you can fuck with the follower all you want, and it's not gonna give you grand thumb. The only real control there's actually two major controls on this rifle. Firstly is your safety mechanism. So right now it is off safe. If it is off safe, obviously that is a click. Actually, interestingly, the safety cannot be engaged if the rifle is not cocked, if the hammer is not cocked. So actually, you literally can't engage the safety at all. You can tell if the hammer is cocked by peering in here. Use my Mi Telefono flashlight. You can actually see through that hole, just underneath the rear sight, you can actually see the hammer right there, resting up against the back of the bolt. If we cock the rifle and then let it forward again, oof, almost got grand thumb there. Now if we look at it, you can see it is no longer there. So we know the hammer is back, it's been cocked. When the rifle is cocked, the safety is this little square down here, and you just pull it in with your finger. Ow, shoot, it just nipped me. Come on, camera, focus on my nip. Well, that's probably not how I wanna say that. Ouchies. All right, well, that's one thing. There's grand thumb, and then there's also getting nipped by the frickin' safety. Well, anyway, yeah, you pull that safety inwards, and now you can see it is on safe. And then the trigger's dead, so nothing will happen. To take it off safe, you just put your finger into the trigger guard and then push it forwards with your finger, and now the rifle is off safe. And there you go. In case you're wondering what this little loop is on the back of the trigger guard, this is a disassembly assisting loop. So basically, to disassemble the rifle, the first thing you do is you pop this out, and then the whole trigger guard swings outwards, and that loosens everything up, and then the whole gun just like comes out of its stock. It's really nice and really easy to disassemble. Sights on the M1 Garand are some of the best sights ever on any battle rifle of World War II. I think most people can agree with me on that. Utterly fantastic. I'll put this up on my shoulder right now and just take a peek. Oh my God, it's great. It's utterly amazing. In fact, there's a reason why this sight picture stayed with US rifles even after World War II. Fun fact, in case you didn't know, or in case you never noticed, the M16's iron sights are basically the same as the M1 Garands. They are pretty much derived from, if not exact identical copies. The M1 Garand, the M1 Garand, is a long stroke gas piston system. Fun fact, it is actually very, very similar to the gas system of the AK-47. Kalashnikov himself wrote in his book that he really admired the M1 Garand. He thought it was a fantastic rifle, he thought Garand was a great gun designer, and took a couple of design notes from it, most namely the idea for the long stroke gas piston system. On the Garand, it's just the gas piston itself. Looks pretty much the same as the AK's gas piston. The big thing that Kalashnikov did was he definitely made his own bolt design, flipped it over so that the piston and the gas tube and everything was above the barrel and not below it. Actually, Brandon Herrera has a great video comparing the AK-47 and the M1 Garand and showing you exactly how they are similar. So yeah, actually, people out there who often say that the AK-47 was just a copy of the STG-44, conceptually it was, in the sense that it was a, intermediate cartridge assault rifle, and generally they look kind of similar with like banana-style magazines, and the sights and everything kind of look the same. But mechanically, the AK-47 actually shares a much deeper lineage with the M1 Garand, which is totally another mark to add to the reasons to absolutely adore this rifle and to genuinely think that it actually is probably one of the greatest rifles ever devised. The bayonet that I have is a complete reproduction, like I showed earlier. This bayonet obviously has no historical value or significance at all. The mounting system is the exact same as the 1903. You have a bayonet and it fits your 1903, it'll also fit on a Garand, and vice versa. If you have a Garand and you have a bayonet and then you purchase a 1903, the bayonets will fit. They are completely interchangeable. The only thing that changed between the bayonets between World War I and World War II is they simply shortened the blade. So, final notes when it comes to my particular rifle, the history, provenance of the rifle, as well as some small markings and things and accessories. Actually, accessories, I'll just say sling. This is a reproduction sling that I bought actually at the CMP, which we'll get into here in a second. This is obviously a copy of the slings that came into use at the very end of World War II. Again, I think it was like December of 1944. They switched over to the canvas slings. So, historical provenance of my particular rifle and markings. Well, it's pretty simple. The receiver on this rifle is marked. I don't have any crayon wax on this one, unfortunately, so nothing is marked orange or white. And I know it's going to be pretty much impossible to see on camera, but I'll include a more detailed close-up photo. But this says U.S. Rifle Caliber 30, International Harvester, serial number 4,589,252. So yes, this is an International Harvester receiver, and given that serial number, this puts this rifle at a 1954 manufacture date, which is post-World War II. So that is kind of a shame that I couldn't get an actual World War II example of an M1 Garand, but it's not the end of the world. That brings me into where I actually got this rifle from, which is to say, I keep mentioning it, the CMP, the Civilian Marksmanship Program, which is basically a kind of government subsidized private organization that helps promote marksmanship and weapons training amongst the people of the United States, particularly with the youth. They really like to focus on helping young people learn how to shoot for the first time and become good marksmen, and help get people into like competition shooting and stuff like that. Well, this past April, I was heading down to the Armor and Cavalry Collection down in Fort Moore in Georgia, and one of the two stores that the CMP actually operates is down in Talladega, Alabama, which is a short jump over from Georgia. So this past April, when I went down to the Armor and Cavalry Collection with my father and a friend of mine, I decided that we should take the short jump over to Talladega, and we actually went to the Talladega Marksmanship Park, and I, in person, walked into the CMP and bought this exact Garand, and then put it in our car, and we lugged it all the way back up here to Virginia. And so, I think that's just about it for this video on my Springfield 1903 and my M1 Garand. The main service rifles of the United States during World War I in particular and World War II. Although, like I already said, technically this got beaten out, and for World War II, the answer really is both. But hey, either way, these are just really cool rifles, and I'm very, very happy to have them in my collection. So today we really covered the United States. Obviously in part 2 we covered the British, and as I kept alluding to over and over again, and in fact, I say alluded to, but I literally said it outright, in the next episode we are going to cover the Russians in my Mosins. Already giving you guys pretty much the full sneak peek of what we've got there, but stay tuned for part 4 when I eventually talk about that stuff. And I've got many more guns to bring up in even more episodes. My collection, like I said, has gotten honestly quite large, and this is basically just a series steadily going through it. I know guns are not usually what I do on this channel, but hey, military history, like I love tanks, I really do. Like, tanks are still my bread and butter, and they're still what I am by far the most interested in. But I have to say, like, especially recently, I've just really been bitten by the gun bug. And I think a big part of it is because I can actually own guns. I mean, you can own a tank, but they're very expensive and very hard to maintain. And I don't have a house, I don't have a garage to keep them in. But guns are these kind of things where, you know, just a couple $100 and you can snap one up, and then it becomes this whole project of that you go tracking down the clips and you track down the slings and, well, the scabbards and bayonets, and it becomes this whole like project, you know, and there's so much to get into. Like, just recently I got into reloading for the first time. These are actually the first bullets that I ever reloaded. Like, I actually made these bullets myself. I'm very excited to go shoot them for the first time and try them out and see how my reloading skills have, see where I'm at on my first batch of self-made ammunition. I'm training, by the way, my reloading skills for my most recent rifle acquisition, which I will flash for the camera here for just a second. Boom. If you recognize this, feel free to shout it out in the comments down below, but I just bought me this rifle and have wanted to make ammo for it because the ammo is literally non-existent. You can't get it. It does not exist. But anyways, if you are interested in that, if you liked this video, go ahead and again, leave a like and subscribe, and all the stuff that I said I was gonna forget at the beginning of the video, I'm bringing it up now. Join the Patreon if you haven't already. Hopefully, watching this video, I have earned a little Patreon subscription from you, but if not, I totally understand. Yeah, I mean, just thank you everyone else for watching and just hanging out and spending your time with me, because it means a lot that people actually care about any of this, because I care about it a whole lot. And this is all really just a backwards way to get me to share with all of you my passions. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode of this gun series. And if you enjoyed this one, I highly recommend you check out the Lee Enfield video, because it's pretty much the same as this one and really, really good information there. I'm gonna let you go now and have a fantastic rest of your day or evening. My name is Ed320. Peace out.